She was still laughing when I set the ring on the table. Not a nervous laugh. Not the kind you do when you don't know what else to do. A real laugh. The kind that reaches the eyes. The kind that means you think something is genuinely funny. And what was so funny? Her father had just told 37 people, including my mother, my best friend, and the 2 colleagues who drove 3 hours from Nashville to be there, that I was a gold digger who had been chasing their family's money from the moment I met Vivian, in front of everyone, at our engagement dinner. And she laughed. My name is Cole Merritt. I'm 35 years old. I write software. I built a company from a laptop in a 1-bedroom apartment in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and turned it into something real. Something that employs people, pays their health insurance, and has been profitable every single year since year 2. I grew up with nothing. I worked for everything. And for the last 2.5 years, I thought I had finally found the one person I wanted to share all of it with. I was wrong. But before I tell you what happened that night, and what happened in the weeks after I placed that ring on the white tablecloth and walked out of that restaurant without a word, I need you to understand something about me and Vivienne, because this wasn't a story that started badly. This was a story that started beautifully, which is exactly what made the ending so devastating. And before we get into all of it, if this kind of story speaks to you, if you believe that dignity is worth more than staying in a room where people don't respect you, then hit subscribe, leave a comment, and give this video a like. It helps more people find these stories, and I genuinely read what you write down there. Now let me take you back to where this all began. I met Vivian Calloway at a tech conference in Nashville in the spring of 2 years ago. I wasn't supposed to go. My original plan was to send one of my developers, Brandon, because I had 2 product deadlines that week and no patience for conference small talk. But Brandon's wife went into early labor on a Tuesday morning, so I packed a bag and drove down myself. Vivienne was speaking on a panel about user experience design in healthcare software. She worked for a mid-sized consultancy out of Brentwood, the kind of firm that handled digital transformation for hospital systems across the Mid-South. She was sharp, direct, and clearly the most prepared person on that stage. When someone in the audience asked a lazy question, the kind designed to make the questioner look smart rather than actually get information, she answered it in a way that was both polite and completely dismantling. I remember thinking, that woman does not suffer fools. I introduced myself after the panel. She was polite but busy. I gave her my business card and told her I'd built a patient intake optimization platform that might be worth a conversation. She looked at the card, looked at me, and said, I'll reach out if I think there's something there. Professional. No nonsense. She did not flutter her eyelashes or pretend to be more interested than she was. She emailed me 4 days later. We had a business call that turned into a 2-hour conversation about technology, small-town Tennessee, what it means to actually build something versus just manage something, and how neither of us had been camping since childhood, even though we both claimed to love the outdoors. She had strong opinions about healthcare software and was not shy about sharing them, including the opinion that most platforms in the space were built by engineers who had never once sat in a hospital waiting room and understood what it actually felt like to be on the other side of the intake process. I told her she was right. She seemed mildly surprised that I agreed so quickly. I told her I'd had the same argument with my own developers 3 months earlier and had made significant changes to our product as a result. She asked smart follow-up questions. So did I. By the end of it, we had agreed to meet for coffee in Nashville the following weekend. By the end of that coffee, I knew I was in trouble. Not bad trouble. The other kind. What I noticed about Vivienne, from very early on, was that she was completely uninterested in performing a version of herself for anyone's benefit. She said what she thought. She was direct without being unkind. She had no patience for pretense, which made her easy to be around in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. I had dated women who were impressive in rooms full of people, and exhausting when the room cleared. Vivienne was the opposite, easy to be with when it was just the 2 of us, and genuinely impressive in public because she wasn't trying to be. There's a difference, and it matters more than most people realize. We dated for 8 months before I met her family. That was not accidental on her part. Vivienne was private about her personal life, always had been, and she told me early on that she didn't bring people home until she was certain. When she finally told me she wanted me to come to Knoxville to meet her parents, I understood the weight of what she was saying. I drove up on a Saturday in January, nervous in a way I hadn't been since I was pitching investors in my company's first year. The Calloway family lived in a house in West Knoxville that sat on about 2 acres, gated, with a circular driveway and a porch that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. The house itself was older, colonial style, well-maintained, the kind of property that had been there long enough to feel permanent. It was not showy in the way that new money is showy, all clean angles and expensive materials with nowhere to sit comfortably. It was the opposite of that. It was a house that said, "We have been here a long time, and we intend to continue being here." I noticed that about it before I even got out of my truck. Her father, Douglas Calloway, was a commercial real estate developer. The kind of man who had made generational money and wore that fact quietly but unmistakably. He was tall, silver-haired, with the careful manners of someone who had spent decades sizing people up across boardroom tables. He shook my hand, poured me a bourbon I hadn't asked for, and spent the first hour asking questions that were polished enough to sound like conversation, but sharp enough to be interrogation. What do you do exactly? How long have you been doing it? Is it profitable? Do you own the company outright, or are there investors involved? I answered everything honestly. I told him I had founded my company 4 years earlier, that we had turned a profit in year 2, that I had bought out my one early investor 18 months ago and now owned 100% of the company, that we had 12 full-time employees and 3 contractors, and that my recurring revenue was strong enough that I hadn't touched my savings in over 2 years. He nodded slowly after each answer. Not warmly, not coldly either, just carefully, like a man entering data into a spreadsheet that only he could see. Vivienne's mother, Patricia, was easier. She was a former high school English teacher who had retired early and now ran a small nonprofit focused on literacy programs in rural East Tennessee counties. She asked about my childhood, about my parents, about what books I read. She was warm where Douglas was measured. By the end of that first dinner, I liked her. Douglas, I wasn't sure about, but I respected him. A man who built something real, who was protective of his daughter. I could understand that. I wasn't offended by his scrutiny. I expected it. What I did not expect was everything that came after. Over the following 18 months, Vivienne and I grew closer in every way that mattered. We moved in together into a house I bought in a neighborhood near Percy Warner Park in Nashville. A real house with a yard and a guest room and a kitchen big enough that 2 people could actually cook in it at the same time without arguing. She decorated most of it. I paid for all of it. That arrangement came naturally to us at first because I made considerably more money than she did, and we were both practical enough to acknowledge that without making it strange. But Douglas noticed. Every time Vivienne mentioned something new about our life together, a weekend trip to Asheville, a dinner reservation somewhere nice, the new couch she'd picked out, Douglas would make a comment. Nothing direct at first, just small observations. "That sounds expensive," he said once when Vivienne described a weekend we'd taken to Charleston. "Cole must be doing well," he said another time, the emphasis on must making the sentence sound less like a compliment and more like a question with a sharp edge. I told myself I was being too sensitive. Vivienne told me I was being too sensitive. Her mother told me Douglas was just protective and to give him time, so I gave him time. I proposed to Vivienne on a Wednesday evening in November, on the rooftop of the Kimpton Ayrton Hotel in Nashville, where we had gone on our very first official date. I had the ring custom made, a round-cut diamond in a platinum setting, chosen with help from a jeweler in East Nashville, who had been in business for 30 years and knew exactly what he was doing. We had spent 2 hours in his shop one Saturday morning, ostensibly browsing, while I paid close attention to which settings she lingered over and which ones she moved past without comment. She didn't know that was what I was doing. She thought I was just being a good sport about jewelry shopping. It was not the most expensive ring in the world. It was not meant to be. It was meant to be the ring that Vivienne, who understood quality and hated ostentation, would look at every day and love without ever feeling like it was trying too hard. It was understated and precise and exactly right, which is what she was, so I figured they deserved each other. She said yes before I had finished asking the question. We called her parents from the rooftop, still laughing. Patricia cried. Douglas said, "Congratulations to you both," which was more warmth than I had ever heard from him in one sentence, and I thought, maybe this is the turning point. Maybe now that this is real, he will finally let his guard down. We set the engagement dinner for 3 weeks later. It was Vivienne's idea to make it a larger gathering, not just immediate family but close friends and a few colleagues from both sides. The restaurant was Henley, on Church Street in Nashville, a place we both loved for its southern food done right, its warm lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that felt celebratory without being pretentious. We booked the private dining room. Vivienne handled most of the planning. I handled the reservation and the wine. 37 people came. Everything started well. The room was full and warm. My mother, Sandra, had driven up from Murfreesboro and was already deep in conversation with Vivienne's Aunt Carol by the time I arrived. My best friend, Derek Sutton, who had been my roommate in college and was now a physician in Franklin, was at the bar telling a story that was making 3 people laugh. Patricia Calloway found me within the first 5 minutes and hugged me with genuine feeling, told me she was so happy, that Vivienne deserved someone who looked at her the way I did. I felt good. I felt grateful. Douglas arrived late. He came in with a confidence that immediately shifted the energy in the room. Not dramatically, not rudely, but in the way that people who are accustomed to being the most important person in any room always do. He shook hands, kissed cheeks, accepted a glass of wine, and found his seat at the long center table. He sat directly across from me. Dinner went well for the first hour. The food was excellent. Braised short rib, roasted root vegetables, a cornbread that my mother declared the best she had ever tasted. People told stories. There were toasts. Derek gave one that was funny and kind in equal measure, the kind of toast only someone who has known you for 15 years can give, because it's specific enough to actually mean something. Patricia gave one that made Vivienne cry in a good way. Then Douglas stood up. I noticed the slight change in the room the way you notice weather shifting. Not with your eyes exactly, but with the back of your neck. Something went quiet. People who had been mid-conversation turned. He had that quality, Douglas Calloway. He commanded attention without asking for it. "I want to say a few words," he said, and smiled at the room. The smile was polished and confident, and did not reach the top half of his face. He talked about Vivienne first, about how she had always been the most determined person in any room she walked into, about how she had earned everything she had through intelligence and work ethic and a refusal to be underestimated. He said it with the pride of a man who genuinely believed it, and I believed him. It was true. All of it was true. I loved Vivienne partly for exactly those reasons. Then he turned to me. "And Cole," he said. And there was a pause. The kind of pause that is not accidental. I will say that when Vivienne first brought you home, I did my homework, as any father would. He smiled again, still polished. "You've built yourself a nice little business. Good for you. But I want to be transparent tonight, since we're all family here." I felt something happen in my chest. Not panic, not yet. Just a kind of stillness. "My daughter has a trust fund," Douglas said, his voice completely even. "She has a family name, a family network, and a future that was secured before she ever met you. And I want to be clear about something that I think everyone in this room should understand." He looked at me directly. Men like Cole, men who come from nothing, who build something small and call it success, have a habit of seeing opportunity when they see prosperity. That's not a character flaw exactly. It's just survival instinct. But it's something a father notices. The room had gone completely silent. I heard my mother put down her fork. "I'm not saying anything against your character, Cole," Douglas continued, still calm, still smiling, still utterly at ease. "I'm just being honest, the way I always am. You are marrying up. Significantly. And I think everyone here can see that. I genuinely hope, that what you feel for my daughter is as real as you say it is. Because if it isn't, we will find out. And my family does not forgive that kind of thing." He raised his glass. "To Vivian," he said, "and to wherever this road takes them." A few people raised their glasses. Awkwardly, uncertainly, the way you do when you're not sure whether you just witnessed something devastating or misread it completely. I looked at Vivian. She was not looking at me. She was looking at her father with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not shock, not horror, not the hot flush of someone who is mortified by what just happened. She was half smiling. Her shoulders were relaxed. And then someone near the end of the table, I still don't know who, some cousin of hers whose name I couldn't have told you then and certainly can't tell you now, made a quiet comment that I didn't catch, and Vivian laughed. Not a full laugh, not a burst. Just that small, soft, recognizing laugh you make when you find something funny, but are trying to hold it in. She laughed, and in that moment, I understood something that I wish I had understood much sooner. This was not a surprise attack on Douglas's part. This was not a moment of poor impulse control from an overprotective father who sometimes said the wrong thing. This was a man who had said, out loud, at our engagement dinner, in front of 37 people, what he actually thought of me. And his daughter, the woman wearing my ring, had heard it, and found some version of it funny enough to smile at. I sat with that for about 30 seconds. Then I reached across the table, picked up the ring box that had been sitting near the centerpiece as a kind of celebratory display. Vivian's idea. She had wanted people to see it. Opened it, and took the ring off Vivian's finger. She looked at me then. The half-smile was gone. I set the ring on the white tablecloth, directly between us, in a space where everyone at the table could see it. I folded my napkin. I stood up. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I looked at my mother, who was watching me with clear eyes and a still face that told me she understood exactly what she was watching. I looked at Derek, who had put down his glass and was very carefully not reacting in any visible way. Then I looked at Douglas Calloway, who was watching me with an expression I can only describe as professional interest, like a man observing a situation he had expected and was now monitoring to see how it resolved. I did not say anything to him. I did not say anything to anyone. I walked out of the private dining room, through the main floor of Henley, past the bar and the tables of people having ordinary Friday night dinners without any of this, out through the glass front doors, and into the cold November air on Church Street in Nashville. I stood on the sidewalk for about a minute, breathing. The November air in Nashville that night was cold enough to see your breath. There was traffic on Church Street, Ubers and taxis, people heading to the bar district a few blocks east, someone walking a dog with those small booties on its paws that the dog clearly found undignified. Normal Friday night. The world was entirely uninterested in what had just happened inside that restaurant, which I found, in that moment, both absurd and deeply comforting. I thought about going back in. I will be honest about that. I stood on that sidewalk and thought, you could go back in. You could sit back down and finish your dinner and deal with this tomorrow. Privately, where it belongs. That would be the mature thing. That would be the composed thing. But then I thought about my mother, sitting at that table, having heard what she heard. My mother, who had raised me alone, who had worked double shifts for years, who had never once in my entire life given me reason to feel like we were less than anyone else. Having to sit there and listen to a man tell a room full of people that her son was after someone else's money. And I knew I was not going back in. I got in my truck and drove home. Vivian texted me 11 minutes after I left, then called, then texted again, then called again. I read the texts. I did not respond to any of them. The texts were, in order. Cole, where are you? Then Cole, please. Then I know that was horrible and I'm so sorry. Then please just talk to me. Then I understand why you left, but we need to talk tonight. Then. This is not the end of us. Please don't make this the end of us. I turned my phone face down on my kitchen counter and sat in the dark for a long time. My mother called me at 10:30. I answered. She did not ask how I was feeling. She did not tell me what I should do. She said, "I watched your face across that table tonight. I want you to know that I am proud of you." Then she said she was going to drive back to Murfreesboro and that I should call her in the morning. I said I would. She said she loved me. I said I loved her. We hung up. I did not sleep that night. Vivian came home around midnight. I was still in the kitchen. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table. The same table we had eaten Sunday breakfast at. The same table where she had spread out her work documents on late evenings. The same table where we had talked about the future, with the easy confidence of two people who thought they already knew what it looked like. She looked exhausted. Her makeup was smudged. She had clearly been crying. "I'm so sorry," she said. I looked at her for a moment. "What exactly are you sorry for?" "For what my dad said. For how he said it. For not defending you the moment he said it." "You laughed," I said. She closed her eyes. "I know. I need you to explain that to me, Vivian. Because I've been sitting here for 4 hours trying to understand how the person who agreed to marry me sits at our engagement dinner and laughs while her father tells 37 people that I'm a gold digger." "I wasn't laughing at what he said," she said. "I was laughing at something Madison said beside me. Something unrelated." "It was related," I said. "You were laughing in that moment. That room felt what it felt. And I felt it." She was quiet. "Did you know he was going to say something like that?" I asked. Another silence. Longer this time. "I knew he had concerns," she said carefully. "He's expressed them before. Not exactly like that, but before," I said. "He's expressed them before. And you never told me. I thought I could handle him. I thought this was going to be a celebration, and that he would be gracious, and it would be fine." "You thought he would be gracious," I repeated. "After expressing privately to you concerns that I was with you for your money. You thought he would take a room full of people and decide to be gracious." She had no answer for that. "Here's what I need you to understand," I said. "I don't care about your trust fund. I have never cared about your trust fund. I have more money than I know what to do with already. Not your family's kind of money, I know that, but mine. Earned. Every dollar of it. Your father stood up tonight and told a room full of people who know me, including my mother, that I am a fraud. And you sat there. And you laughed." "Cole, I'm not done." I wasn't raising my voice. I didn't feel the urge to raise my voice. "The ring is on the table at Henley. I assume someone brought it back. I don't want it back. I'm not interested in having a conversation about whether to continue this engagement right now. What I'm interested in is understanding something very simple. Is your father's opinion of me something that you share, even partially, even secretly?" She looked at me for a long time. "No," she said. "Absolutely not." "But you let him say it." "I didn't let him. You laughed." The silence after that was the kind that fills a room completely. She left the kitchen and went to bed. I stayed where I was until morning. The next 10 days were the strangest of my adult life. Vivian and I were civil to each other in the way that two people are civil when they are trying to decide whether they are going to end or save something important. We ate meals together. We talked about practical things, work, schedules, a plumbing issue in the guest bathroom that needed to be fixed regardless of everything else. We were careful with each other in the way that tells you, more than anything else, that something has broken. Derek came over on a Sunday and we sat on my back porch for 3 hours. He did not try to tell me what to do. He listened. When I was done talking, he said, "You know what the issue is, right? It's not what Douglas said. It's that she already knew he thought it, and she managed that information without you." "I know," I said. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." On the 5th day after the dinner, I got a call from Douglas Calloway. I almost didn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail. But something in me, stubbornness maybe, or the plain desire to hear what he would possibly say, made me pick up. "Cole," he said. His voice was exactly the same as it always was. Composed. Even. "I owe you an apology." I did not say anything. "What I said at dinner was inappropriate," he continued. "It was not the right venue, and it was not the right tone. I want you to know I understand that." I noticed he was apologizing for the venue and the tone, not the content. "Do you believe what you said?" I asked. A pause, shorter than I expected. "I believe that my daughter has worked hard for everything she has, and that I want to protect what she's built." "That's not what I asked," I said. "Do you believe that I am with Vivian for her money?" Longer pause this time. "I believe," he said finally, "that human motivations are complex, and that it is a father's job to ask uncomfortable questions." "I see," I said. "Cole, Mr. Calloway, I grew up in a house in Smyrna, Tennessee, where my mother worked double shifts at a nursing home for 8 years while I was in school. I wore the same pair of jeans for 2 years in middle school because we couldn't afford new ones. I built my company on a credit card that I maxed out twice before it started to work. I have never asked your daughter for anything, and I never would. But I want to be clear. I heard everything you said at that dinner, and I heard what you did not say just now. Have a good evening." I hung up. Vivian found out about the call that night. She asked me what he had said. I told her. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He didn't actually apologize, did he?" It wasn't a question. "Not for the part that matters," I said. That was the moment. Not the dinner, not the laughter, not any of the silence that followed, that I saw something change in Vivian's face. Like a piece of information had finished processing and landed in a place she hadn't expected. "I've been managing him my whole life," she said very quietly. "I learned how to do it so well that I stopped noticing I was doing it." "And where does that leave me?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. When she did, she said, "I don't know." I want to be fair to her, because this story is not simple, and she is not a villain. Over the 2 weeks that followed, Vivian and I had conversations I think we should have had before we ever got engaged. Real ones. Not the easy, comfortable, forward-looking conversations that feel like planning, but the harder ones about family and loyalty, and what it means to be chosen by someone, versus what it means to belong to a family that has its own gravitational pull. She told me things she had never told me before. She told me that Douglas had opposed every serious relationship she had ever been in. That there had been a man before me, a lawyer from Memphis named Tyler, who had lasted 3 years before Douglas had dismantled the relationship, slowly, methodically, through a combination of quiet criticism and strategic doubt planting until Vivienne could no longer see Tyler clearly through the fog of her father's opinions. She said she had told herself she was smarter now, more independent, more capable of separating her own judgment from her father's. She said she had believed that when she said yes to my proposal. She told me that when Douglas had expressed his concerns about me privately, she had genuinely believed she could manage it. That she could keep him at arm's length emotionally without having to choose. That his concerns were the kind that would dissolve on their own once he spent more time with me and saw who I actually was. She told me that when he stood up at the dinner and began speaking, she felt the floor drop out from under her, and that instead of standing up and stopping him, she had frozen. That the laugh, the one that I saw, the one that everyone saw, was not a laugh of agreement or amusement at my expense. It was what she does when she is so overwhelmed and mortified that her body produces a noise that has nothing to do with what she is feeling. I believed her. That was the difficult part. I believed her. I could see the truth of it in everything she told me. She was not a woman who had secretly agreed with her father's assessment of me. She was a woman who had spent 34 years learning to survive inside her father's force of personality, and who had not yet figured out how to fully step outside it. The question was whether that was something she could actually change, and whether I was willing to wait to find out. We took 3 days apart. She stayed with Patricia. I stayed in the house. I worked. I went running in Percy Warner Park every morning at 6, in the cold, in the dark, which I find clarifying in a way that nothing else is. On the 3rd day, I called Derek. "If you go back," he said, Douglas wins. He tested you at that dinner. Maybe not consciously, but he did. He wanted to see if you would fold. If you go back to that engagement without something having structurally changed, you are telling him that you will absorb whatever he throws at you and stay anyway. And then, you will spend the rest of your marriage managing that man. And if I don't go back, I said, then you lose Vivian, who you love, who is not the same person as her father. That's not a very helpful framework, I said. No, he said, it isn't, because there isn't a clean answer here. There's only what you can live with. I thought about that for 2 more days. On the 5th day, Vivian came back. She sat across from me at that kitchen table again. She had clearly been thinking just as hard as I had, and she looked like it. I spoke to a therapist, she said, 3 times in the last week. I've been going over things I should have gone over years ago, about my father, about the patterns. I waited. I'm not asking you to pretend the dinner didn't happen, she said. I'm not asking you to forgive my father. I'm asking you to decide whether you believe I am capable of choosing differently than I have before. Because I believe I am. But I understand that you have no reason to simply take my word for it. What does choosing differently look like? I asked. It means that I have already told my father that if he does not offer you a genuine and unconditional apology, not an apology for the venue or the tone, but for the accusation itself, he will not be at our wedding. And I mean that. I looked at her carefully. You told him that? Yes. What did he say? She held my gaze. He said that he would need time to think about it. And what did you say to that? I said that he had 2 weeks, and that in the meantime, I would be spending those 2 weeks deciding whether the man I am engaged to is someone I am willing to fight for, loudly and publicly and without apology, from this point forward. And that the answer was yes. The answer has always been yes. I just needed to stop being afraid of him long enough to act like it. I sat with that for a long time. I am not going to tell you that it was simple from that point. It wasn't. Trust is not a light switch. You don't rebuild it in a conversation. You rebuild it in 100 small moments over time, by watching someone act differently than they acted before, by finding out that the promises a person makes in a kitchen at midnight are the same ones they keep when it gets hard. But I will tell you this. I have watched Vivian Calloway fight for us in the months since that dinner in a way that required real courage. She confronted her father in conversations I was not part of and told me about afterward. She set limits on what he could say and how he could behave, and what the consequences of crossing those limits would be. She did not do this privately and then present me with a clean, finished version of her family. She showed me the work. She let me see it messy and imperfect and ongoing. Douglas came to our apartment in February. He sat across from me at that kitchen table. Different chair from Vivian's, same table. And he looked at me for a long moment before he spoke. What he said was not everything I wanted. I won't pretend otherwise. He did not dissolve into remorse or produce a speech that would satisfy everyone. But he said, I was wrong about what I implied at that dinner. I have watched you since then, through my daughter's eyes, through what she has told me, through what I have allowed myself to see, and I was wrong. He extended his hand. I shook it. Not because it erased what happened, not because we were suddenly fine, but because Vivian had stood up and told her father that she was choosing me, and the ring was back on her finger, and we had 340 days until the wedding, and I was not going to spend all of them rehearsing the dinner. There are things I know now that I did not know 2.5 years ago when I introduced myself to Vivian Calloway after a panel session in Nashville. I know that loving someone is not sufficient on its own. You also have to understand the ecosystem they come from, not to judge it, but to understand which parts of it they are still carrying and which parts they have put down. When you miss that, you don't know the person as clearly as you think you do, and eventually something shows you what you missed. Sometimes that thing is small, recoverable, a moment of friction that teaches you something useful, and passes. And sometimes it is an engagement dinner where the woman you love laughs while her father dismantles you in front of everyone you know. I know that the way a person behaves in the worst moment of a public humiliation is not necessarily who they are, But it is information. It is real information that deserves real weight. The question is not whether to factor it in, but how. And that question can only be answered by what happens next, by whether the person shows up the next day and the day after that, and keeps showing up differently. Vivian showed up, imperfectly, messily, over a longer timeline than I would have chosen. But she showed up. I know that Douglas Calloway is not a monster. He is a man who accumulated so much control over his family's world for so long that he stopped being able to see the difference between protection and domination. He genuinely believed he was protecting his daughter that night. That does not make what he did acceptable. But understanding it makes it possible to exist in the same room with him, which is what Vivian needed me to be able to do. A marriage is not just a union of two people. It is a negotiation with everyone those people carry into the room. I understood that intellectually before that dinner. I understand it in my body now. I know that the version of me who walked out of Henley that November night, who placed the ring on the table without a word, who refused to perform the drama of a public confrontation, who simply removed himself from a situation that no longer felt like a place he wanted to be. That version of me was not being cold. He was not being passive. He was not making a statement. He was just being honest. He had been told something important about the room he was in, and he responded to that information clearly. I am glad for him. That instinct, the one that says, I will not stay in a place that treats me as less than I am, that instinct is worth keeping, even when staying would be easier, even when walking away costs you something real. I know that my mother, Sandra Merritt, who drove from Murfreesboro to celebrate her son's engagement and sat at a table where a man told a room full of people that her son was a gold digger, called me the next morning and did not say a single word about what had been done to us. She asked if I was okay. She told me she was proud of me, and she meant both things. That is the kind of woman she is, and everything I know about dignity, I learned from her long before I had any reason to use it, and I know that Vivian and I are getting married in 11 months in a small ceremony at a farm outside of Franklin, Tennessee, with fewer than 50 people. Derek is my best man. Patricia will give a toast. Douglas will be there, and he will behave, because Vivian has made very clear that these are the terms, and they are not negotiable. I don't know what he and I will become over time. Maybe nothing beyond tolerant. Maybe something more, if enough years go by and he keeps deciding to act like the better version of himself. I am not holding my breath. But I am not holding a grudge either, because grudges are heavy and I have a wedding to get to. And the ring, the one that sat on a white tablecloth in the private dining room of Henley on Church Street for approximately 22 minutes while I drove home through downtown Nashville, fits perfectly. It always did. That moment when Cole set the ring on the table and walked out without a single word, that's the part I keep coming back to. Because most of us, when we get humiliated like that, we either explode or we freeze. We make it loud or we make it small. Cole did neither. He just removed himself. Calmly. With everything still intact. And I think there's something really powerful in that. Dignity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just quietly gets up and leaves. So tell me, would you have walked out, or would you have stayed and fought back right there in that room? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this kind of storytelling is what you're looking for, hit subscribe. There's a lot more coming.